Thank you. So as I was saying, we don't have a big slideshow or any kind of big presentation today. I just thought I would leave the agenda a little bit open-ended for us to talk a little bit about the documentation that went out, the plan that went out, how people are feeling about it, and just an opportunity for this team to provide some feedback. And I can start with some of the things that I've heard, and then we can move into anything that anyone else wants to talk about. So as you know, Tuesday night, we presented to the board the plan for reopening, in which we encouraged families to go remote if they feel like they can, in order to reduce the numbers of students in our schools. So that we could adhere to the guidance that we are provided by the state. Guidance, being about 6 feet apart and masking and, making sure that everyone is safe. We talked about remote learning being the primary platform and that kids would be engaging with remote learning either at home or at school. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that could look like. And we also emphasize that we're not going to know exactly the logistics of that until we find out from our community where they stand on that issue. I talked about mixed reviews from the community. I would still say we're there, in terms of mixed feelings from the community, and have heard some feedback from our teacher meetings that there's some confusion about the model and how that might look, some concern about coming back. And being with kids, and what that would look like, given that our staff members have families of their own and kids of their own. And we know, I have some information too to share today. Shelly was able to help me kind of monitor other districts and where they are in their process and what they've announced. And again, it's all over the board. Even in Lake County, there's very, very different models happening. And all the way from, all remote to all in person. So, and everything between. So with that, I would like to, if I could, provide a little bit more clarification for this group on what the thinking is behind having some kids in and some kids out, and the two roles of the instructors in that situation, unless there is something that somebody wants to talk about before I do that.
Can we just quickly introduce Paul? Is this Paul's first task force
meeting? It's your first meeting.
Woo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the welcome, Kelly. Appreciate that.
Paul is our new Lori Brown, but officially he's our technology and data manager.
Happy to help wherever I can.
We're glad you're here.
Yeah, we're super glad you're here. And Paul has jumped in, as we all have, to the deep end of the pool right away and just started getting very used to all of our systems, and has already renewed some things and rolled over kids, and not like, physically, but like rolled them over in systems and Power School. He's been awesome. So thank you, Kelly, and welcome, Paul. So is there anything anyone wants to talk about before I kind of dive into a little bit more about what the model could look like? I'm looking around. Okay. All right. So in terms of thinking about, as remote learning is our common platform, the goal behind that was to limit the focus for teachers. When we had been talking prior to this, about having sort of a choose in or choose out situation. In that case, we're really planning for two different platforms. What will it look like in school when kids are with us, and what would it look like for the kids at home? And the more that, we thought about it as an admin team, and realizing that there's going to be quarantine, there's going to be long-term times when kids and teachers are out. It's like, how are we going to maintain consistency for any of the kids, given that circumstance, and keep kids in the same, kind of on the same scope and sequence, pacing the same way with the curriculum, and be able to feel like if we have to go remote like we did in the spring, how can we lessen the impact and make it less disjointed and disruptive to move from in-person to online? And so the goal was, again, to say, okay, we're going to put our energy into creating an engaging and really effective remote learning program, because we know that everybody at some point this year is probably going to be engaging with that platform. And that's based on, the data we're seeing in the town and the county with regard to this virus. We also know that the virus isn't going away anytime soon. And we know that I'm not seeing that we're going to have a vaccine soon. And even if we did, there are a lot of reports talking about how many people would not be comfortable taking a vaccine that came out that quickly, or taking a vaccine at all. We know that we have community members that don't, and people, we have various levels of belief about vaccines and whether or not they work. So trying to create a sustainable solution for teachers and staff and for kids, and to create a consistent environment was the goal. And that's why we wanted to focus on that remote platform. So how could that look in and out of school? So the administrative team really talked a lot about, okay, so we're putting all this energy and time into creating this good remote situation, what would that look like in school? So what we talked about was that there would be a teacher on every grade level that would be assigned to kind of be a remote teacher. That person would be providing the Zoom direct instruction, right, to all the kids for that grade. There wouldn't be interaction in that case, because obviously you're basically providing a live situation to have instruction. It could be a mini lesson. It could be, explaining a concept. It could be explaining a project. Doing a science demonstration, lots of different ways that Zoom direct instruction could look from that one instructor. Everybody would log in, take a look at it. It would be less than half of the content time for that day. Then when we're done with that direct instruction, we kind of break off into our classes. Some kids will be assigned a class in a remote situation, because if they decide to go remote, they're remote and they're assigned a remote class. They would then probably either be paired up with that remote teacher, or if we needed another remote teacher, depending on how many kids chose that for the grade. And then we'd have the class that's assigned in school, and they would be working with the teacher that's in school, or the teachers that are in school. In a perfect world, all the kids in a grade are working with a grade level teacher, whether it's in school or out of school. The idea of using the remote platform as a springboard is, again, to keep consistency between the two groups. You're planning it together as a team, everything that goes into that Google Classroom, what should be presented on Zoom, when you should break out, what you might do, but then when you break out, each of you does that thing. Obviously, remotely, those things that you can do to support kids after that direct instruction is going to look different. That's going to look more like the spring. Can you use Zoom breakout rooms? Do you email students at that point? What does that look like online? Would look different than if you're in person with the students. In person with the students, it might be, okay, everybody log off. We're done with the Zoom. Now let's think about what we just learned. Let's have a discussion. What questions do you have? Okay, no questions. Let's get started on what you need to be doing. I'll be walking around like you would normally do in class. So that facilitator kind of becomes that differentiated, they're providing differentiated support, they're answering questions, they're being the teacher, helping them do their work. The difference and the reason why it's important to keep that remote learning piece as the consistent piece is because we want to keep kids in that cadence of, okay, I go on for that lesson and then I do some work on my own. Because when we go into phase 3, if we have to shut down, they'd be doing the same thing. They'd just be doing it at home. And then if we all wind up remote, then that team of teachers might decide, okay, now there's not just one remote teacher. Everybody just take your class, do your direct instruction at the same time, then do your breakouts the way you'd want to do them. But at least the student is used to the schedule, is used to that idea of getting their direct instruction and then moving into, some kind of independent or facilitated opportunity for learning, then taking a break and then moving on to the next one. So again, the idea is to kind of keep that regular schedule no matter where they are. The other pieces we know, like I said, we're going to have people experience quarantine. If we have a positive contact and we have to send an entire classroom out, again, for 2 weeks, we don't want it to feel those 2 weeks to feel totally different than any other experience that they have, or to be going back and forth between these two really different platforms. So that was the idea behind it. And again, to try to limit that focus of teachers to be able to plan together and really stay tight on what they want to have happen. And then have that one constant person when you have two programs running, the one constant person to provide that direct instruction. And then you would kind of break out and support kids the way you needed to. So I think that's all I wanted to cover in terms of kind of illustrating it a little bit better. And I'm working on an FAQ or a doc that would kind of write this out and communicate it in a good way, but I don't have it ready for you yet. So hearing that, let's start some questions or discussion. Hi, Paul.
Hi, I just wanted to bring a little bit of awareness. I kind of came across this with Kelly and Nate yesterday or day before when they were asking about breakout rooms in our license level with Zoom. I spoke to the Zoom rep that we met with, Bill, and he did mention that, or actually the research that I was doing is that the breakout rooms right now doesn't appear that they'll be compatible with the Chrome operating systems.
That's good to know.
So that's a big component because all of our students, with the exception of the iPad kids, are using Chrome, a Chrome operating system or Chromebooks for their learning experience. So that's something to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of and see, you know, if the teachers are wanting to use the breakout room feature, it may not be available at least immediately. So I don't know if we want to look at other options or just deal with the fact that they won't have breakout rooms.
So that's good. That's good information. What we can do is consider what we did in the spring, because we didn't know about breakout rooms in the spring. We just weren't using them. So we just assigned different Zoom, like we assigned 4 kids to come into a Zoom and then for a certain amount of time, and then the next 4 would rotate. So you would maybe do it that way. But let's keep on top of that because the breakout rooms are a nice feature. Thanks, Paul. Heather, go ahead. Yep.
The plan you talked about with like the remote teacher and the on-site teacher kind of idea, that does feel like a very elementary K-5 type setup. So I don't know if Joe or Nate or someone's comfortable addressing how that might look for middle school, because I know a lot of the middle school people are watching and going, but I'm the only one who teaches that class. So I don't know.
It's a great question.
Flesh that out for like that.
Joe or Nate, do you feel comfortable talking it through a little bit?
In terms of, Heather, what the role of the facilitator for the folks, for the students that would be in the building, is that what you're referring to?
Well, Lisa talked about how kids would be assigned a remote teacher or a live teacher, which in a K-5 setting makes total sense. But for our building, it might help to, maybe clarify what that's going to look like just for this group and for everyone.
Yeah. Well, and I would answer that by saying, in part, it depends on how many are going to be here, right? Once we know how many are electing to come to the building and receive facilitated remote learning, will help us to drive our plans for that. The first thought would be that we've got our grade level and subject area teachers who are obviously going to be delivering live instruction. If it can be organized in such a way that we can rotate teachers in and out of those spaces where students are here receiving the remote learning from our building, their role is going to be to help manage those kids organizationally, those executive functioning pieces. What do I do now? Where do I find this? How do I get to that? In essence, to serve as, in many ways, what the parent would be doing at home if it's a parent who's really closely involved in what the students have to do. Sometimes, we know in middle school, there's some middle school students who just require a little bit more hand-holding than others. Some just need to be given the opportunity to run with it. We want to try and meet the needs of those kids to the best of our ability, knowing that in a given room, we may have some kids that require more assistance than others. But in terms of answering the question, who specifically would that be? A student might come to school and actually be in a facilitated learning environment with multiple teachers throughout the day would be the best way in which I could answer that at this point. Joe, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that summed it up right, Nate. I think a lot of what you described is maybe what we would do in a typical afternoon advisory time, where you're checking in with students, providing that contact with them, referencing the homework or the work landing page that will be created, seeing, okay, in social studies, we had this to do. Have we worked on that or finished that? Kind of having that more advisory role, whether or not that's what that section's called. You're just facilitating and making sure they're staying on task, addressing any tech concerns, you know, monitoring if kids need to use the restroom, what protocols or procedures we need for that, things like that.
You know, the only thing I might add to that is that we certainly discovered in the spring that some students needed additional support, perhaps a modified plan, some way in which to make sure they were engaging. And for the most part, our advisors took the lead on coordinating that. Perhaps the in-person sort of facilitator here would take more of the lead on that. And on the other end, you know, the students who said, hey, I'm done, I'm ready for more, or I'm finished by 9 o'clock, and we found out, yeah, well, but you didn't actually turn in all of the work that was assigned. And so let's get to the bottom of that and let's get that turned in and done. And then we can talk about some of the extensions that are available. So that's something else that we would see the facilitator helping to help with when kids are here.
I mean, one thing that's like a game changer for middle and high schools right now is the way that we have to shift so that we can limit contact between people and interactions. I mean, at elementary, you just don't have the same amount of travel between class. You have specials and related arts, but it's a little bit different, right? You can keep kids a little bit more self-contained. Middle and high school is a totally different animal. And here, Heather, as you bring up, we're not in a situation where you have multiple teachers who teach the same content. And so we want our kids to be experiencing instruction with the content level experts. We have enough on our plates, right, as teachers to figure out what to do. We don't need people learning more content on top of it and trying to figure out how to teach a different course. So physically, we've got to keep the same people together. I'm going to tell you, I've been in on these conference calls with Lake County superintendents who've had to do contact tracing with positive cases. It is not easy. It is a long process, and you want to do it right because we want to make sure everyone feels safe. And so we have to limit those interactions and really, really change how we do things to keep everyone safe. And again, that was where I wanted to encourage folks to take advantage of that at-home remote option if they can. But like to Nate's point, some people can't, and it wasn't effective for some students. You know, we know that. And so we want to provide that. We're still in phase 4. We can have groups up to 50. You know, even phase 3 has groups up to 10. So we want to be as conservative in terms of keeping everyone safe as possible while adhering to that guidance and still providing a quality education, you know, that's the goal. Christy.
Maybe you guys understand this a lot better than I do. Your explanations made a lot of sense to me from a student perspective and meeting student needs. And I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around what it looks like from a teacher perspective. And I kind of understood from an elementary level, like one grade level teacher will deliver all remote instruction to the grade level. I'm still trying to figure out where they are and what's going on. In middle school, I still don't get how I would explain it to a colleague.
Okay, so that's a good question. So again, a lot of this depends on the number. So it could look like if we have most of the kids remote, you may have 4 or 5 sections at elementary. So let's say we have a 4-section grade level, right? And we have an even split. We have 50% staying home and 50% in school. We could work it out where we pair up. So Christy, you and I are a team, and then Bethany and somebody else are a team, right? And I'm the remote teacher for those 2 sections. And then you guys are the in-person teacher for those 2 sections. And there's another teacher that's kind of handling the remote support for the other section of remote kids, okay? Or the other teacher and the 2 remote teachers are doing the Zoom sessions, and the 2 in-person teachers are doing the in-person sessions, right? Where they are doing that instruction, I don't have the answer to that yet. There's going to be times when they're doing it at home if they're quarantined and well enough to do it, but they could be doing it from school. Right now, unless a teacher has a medical reason to be at home, we're asking that you be in person because we're going to need the support for, getting kids in the building and supervision and bathrooms and all those things. But if you were providing that remote instruction from a space at school, you would have a designated area where you're alone in one office by yourself, providing that Zoom instruction. Kids would be logging in the rooms where they're either at home or in their rooms if you're doing it from school. Does that make sense? And then you would have a quiet place to do your support with your students remotely after you're done broadcasting your Zoom mini lesson. Okay. So let's say, but you could also organize it in a way where it's, maybe let's say you have the majority of kids in school. You might have 4 in-person sections and 1 section that's at home. So you'd still have that remote teacher do that remote piece for that whole grade. And then they'd log off and deal with their 25. And then you have 4 sections in school, in classrooms, doing that remote support. Either way, we're trying to get them with the classroom grade level teacher to do that differentiated support. But again, we want to try to keep kids on the same page, remote and in school, so that when we have to go out, everybody's still on the same page and we're keeping that curriculum guaranteed and viable for all kids. And that remote is a way to do that platform. Bethany, do you have a question? You're right in the middle of my screen. That's why I called you out.
Middle of mine. So I guess I'm just not understanding, like, if 2 people are doing remote in spaces without kids, then the other 2 would have all of the in-class kids, which doesn't make the classes smaller.
So we'd have to work it out where we have to have the right number in school. So the bigger sections will probably be the remote sections.
Right.
But we're going to have to see how it breaks out, and we'll have to design it that way. We're going to have sections that make sense for the space.
Right.
And the amount of teachers in there dealing with those sections. They might not be in a classroom. I mean, if we have more kids come to school, then you might be assigned a space that's maybe not even a classroom so that we can keep people far apart. But we will somehow have to deal with that remote section too. And so, yeah.
So an in-class facilitator may not be a grade level teacher.
There's
If
potential
the numbers
for that.
work that way.
There's potential for that, which is why I can't guarantee it. The hope is that it works out right.
Mhm.
That's our hope, but I don't know until we see the numbers. And it sways in my mind every day. I feel like the sentiment changes every day depending on just what people are hearing and their own life circumstances and what they can handle in terms of supporting their kids with remote learning at home or not. I really don't know. Michelle?
So I'm just also trying to think as a parent. So if I have an elementary school child, who's my contact person, the teacher or the facilitator? And I feel like we said that this could also be changing, and depending on trimester, what they opt in or out. I would want one consistent
Agreed.
Contact person, because it's confusing for the kids and the parents too.
Great point. In my mind, the remote teacher is only the direct contact for the parents in their remote section, if they have one. And then the in-person facilitator teacher, that's the direct contact for the parents of that section, that person that's in there with the kids. Whoever's providing the individualized support is the direct contact for the parents. So the remote Zoom situation is literally just to keep people on pace with that direct instruction, because you're all as a team, and this is different in middle, right? Because you're planning your own content, but we have to get 5 teachers or 4 teachers on the same page at elementary. So you guys are going to be planning that together so that everybody, and this is not my normal philosophy, just so you know, elementary teachers, this is not how I normally am. But we are going to have to stay really tight and consistent at grade levels this year, because we'll have to keep that like skeleton or that like tree trunk is going to have to be the same for all the kids, regardless of where they are. So that foundational piece has to be similar, and then we can branch off. If you're remote with your class, you can provide the differentiation and answer their questions that way. If you're in person, you can do it with the kids that are in front of you, which is why the hope is We can have them with the right teacher wherever they are. But we also know we have sub shortages. We have like sickness. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Like there's some other factors here. So I can't guarantee it because there's some other pieces, but the goal is to get kids with the right teachers so that they can do that work. Vanessa?
Sorry, I tried the spacebar thing and finding out the new strategies for Zoom. Couple things that I wanted to bring up, and this might not be anything we can do anything about, but I just wanted to bring awareness to it. I have heard from some parents in the community. I have the mixed blessing of my son being on a travel baseball team. So everyone asks me all the time when we're at baseball about everything. And I'm trying to, answer the right way and everything. But there has been a lot of parents saying that because it's easier to opt out, they are going to opt their child in, but they don't know if that's actually what they're going to do. So I'm a little bit concerned that the numbers that come back on the survey might not be what actually comes into school. So
You're absolutely, I hear you. And I agree. There's really no way to predict how this is going to go. And I know, I mean, listen, it's a community, right? It's a small community. Any community has communication between community members. And so we'd like to think that we're working together as a community to keep everyone as safe as possible and to have the kids in school that need to be in school and the kids at home who can handle being at home. I mean, the fact of the matter is to adhere to the guidance, we can't do it if we bring 100% of our kids back every day. We can't do it.
right.
So we're trying to develop a system where we're not burdening teachers by planning for 2 platforms. We're not burdening the community by saying everybody out, or you have to find childcare 2 days a week or 3 days a week. But the reality is, if 90% of our families come back and say we want to be in school, then we have to adjust our model. We will probably be in a hybrid situation at that point with in-school and remote opportunities, like some districts in the area have had to do. Now, we have other elementary districts in the area that have said, we're all in and you can opt out if you want. And they're planning for that way. And they're repurposing spaces and reassigning teachers and doing that to keep class sizes small. And that's another way to go. And then we have other bigger districts who are saying, we're all out. And it's all over the board. Elementaries, we had a couple go this week, all remote. Grays Lake just announced yesterday, they're all remote, but they're going to try to provide safe spaces in school for remote learning.
If I can, go ahead.
No, Nate, go ahead, please.
If I can just add to that in response to Vanessa's comment and try and appeal to the 18 folks that are watching this live and maybe the other parents that are going to watch it in our recording. Just in this short time, you've heard us talk and say, it depends, and it depends on numbers. We've said that time and again. Having accurate information and accurate data for us to actually plan around is going to make a huge difference. So I would encourage any parent who has questions to reach out. I would also suggest that they spend time reviewing really the detailed information that's been posted on our website so that they can make an informed decision and not just simply say, yeah, I'll be in and I'll decide later. Well, we're going to be forced to pivot in that scenario if all of a sudden we get a percentage that doesn't actually show up. We've got to be able to make some decisions based on good information.
Thank you for that, Nate. I also heard a little bit before you go, Amanda. I know you've been raising your hand a couple of times. I heard a little bit about the pictures that I showed at the board meeting and how, maybe the perception was that I was trying to scare people into going home, by showing those pictures. I really did not intend for it to be that way, but, the perception is reality for some folks. The reality is people will be wearing masks. People will be behind plexiglass. People will be having bathroom breaks one at a time. We're going to be, having to do screening procedures. There's going to be, ways that we have to move around classrooms. There's going to be signage and things. We are a public institution. We are not a private school. We have guidelines that we need to adhere to as a public entity. And, we want to do that. We don't want to put anybody at risk. We don't want to put our staff at risk. We don't want to put our kids at risk. We don't want to put our community at risk. We want to be a community support. And so I didn't mean to scare everyone, but that's the reality of what we're going to have to do to keep everyone safe. Amanda, do you want to go?
I think the thing that I keep getting caught up on is, so we have remote teachers, facilitators, and it almost kind of sounds like I think I'm getting caught up in classroom teacher. Cause like that, I don't know if it's like an egocentric vision that I'm having, cause that's my role is classroom teacher, but it almost sounds like that we need to like eliminate those two words from.
We might need to. Yeah.
I'm a little bit worried. As a classroom teacher and for parents, I feel like parents really invest in the teachers that we have in our school, more so than lots of districts, I think. And they're super supportive and they really believe in that classroom teacher student relationship. So I'm wondering how this is going to change some people's ideas. Like if there's a chance that they are in person and I'm there, well, hooray, they get to be with their teacher, or they might not, there's just this weird thing that I think is going to pull people in different directions based on this. It's kind of like a risk, like you could be with a teacher or you could not, right? So I don't know if people are going to be playing that game like.
Well, the reality is there is a risk to going back. There's a risk to any situation. The thing that I was trying to do, and I hear what you're saying 100%, because really what's happening is as a grade level, we are going to take responsibility for those kids. Like if we're a 5th grade team, we're going to work with those 5th graders and we're going to figure it out. So that feels different than this is your class, this is your class, this is my class. So that's the first paradigm shift. The other piece was with the intent to try, because what I was hearing from some parents was, I'm afraid to send them, but I'm also afraid to have them stay home because I'm afraid they're going to be behind the kids who are in school. Mm-hmm. And so the goal behind saying remote is a foundation for us was to help people make a decision without fear. Like it doesn't matter where you're going, we're going to provide a thing for everyone. It's going to be guaranteed and viable as much as possible. It's going to be consistent as much as possible so that you can make a decision and not be afraid. And because we know we don't make good decisions when we're afraid. But to your point, that focus may have confused people, like who's my teacher then if we're doing both. So I don't know how the wording needs to change because really what it is just as a team, we're going to be teaching our grade together. We're going to be figuring it out and working on it together. Andy, help us out.
Just to piggyback on that, I think Amanda hit it on the head with what parents are thinking. And I know we've had similar discussions in my family, and I've been confused. I've been at every one of these meetings and read the big document multiple times. So, and that's not a knock at all. It's complicated. I think in addition to that, though, to maybe take it a step further, is I think the way you phrased it now in terms of the philosophy and rationale behind making this choice makes a lot of sense. And I think the way you framed it at the board meeting makes a lot of sense. I think where there's a disconnect is people can ask me, what was the pivot point? What was it that happened from this time last week when there was a different plan to Tuesday, when there was kind of a much different thing that went into place? And I think if people maybe in the communications could better understand what that was, because if the way you're saying it now, if that was said from the very beginning, I think people would have an easier time, would have had more time to think about it. But it shifted so rapidly and so significantly in a short period of time and so close to when parents have to make the decision. I think that's why some people are thinking, well, I need more time. I'm going to opt in and maybe choose before the first day of school. So maybe some advanced communication about that would be helpful.
I hear you. I think hopefully the Q&A on Monday will help with parents. And I'll tell you why the pivot, because the information changes so fast around this. And as I was seeing us approach the weeks, and I knew the weeks were coming where the districts were going to have their plans ready, and I could see in advance what was happening, the shift was moving to people being afraid to send their kids, but also being afraid to be left behind. And so in our minds as an administrative team, running two programs well, two distinct programs in and out of school, we kept running into dead ends. I was on the board meeting for my son's district last night, and the administrative team was describing it that way. Just felt like every time we tried to make a consistency out of in and out, both programs, we ran into dead ends. And it's like, there's got to be something common, no matter where the kids are, so that people don't have to be afraid. of what the choices that they're making. They're not sacrificing one for the other. Now, is it going to be perfect? It's not going to be perfect. You know, we recognize that. We're going to do the absolute best we can, but it's not going to be perfect. So I think that's great. And I think that helps me, and I can frame a little bit of a presentation on the 27th too. And I have an opportunity tomorrow to talk with the village. We're going to do a little bit of like a recording for the community too. I'll try to get information out that way also to clarify. Paige?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, one of the thoughts also about parents is they don't understand the platforms that we use. And if they're at home trying to help their students and they have to log into Clever, all these different avenues that they have to go to get to the things they need, especially for our youngest kindergarten who have never been in the school, and perhaps even the 6th graders going into middle school, using new platforms, and having parents who don't have that, you know, those tools to know, like, how are we going to ensure that the teachers along with the staff and students know what they're doing. And I'm just thinking of the library stuff that's all new, and all the things that are, you know, online that are possibly new.
Yeah, it's a great point. So we have talked about that exact issue. I don't have an answer right now other than we're going to provide parent education on the things we need to. It might be a video, it might be you know, an email with instructions and a video. But yes, we will have to address that concern for sure. Go ahead, Michelle.
You want us to be honest and don't hold back, so I'm going to. And it's not even, I'm going back to when we first started doing this, and you said that you guys were picturing 2 different experiences. And then the more we got further along, we knew that the remote platform was going to be our thing, right? Not platform, but our remote learning was what we're doing so that we can pivot. And so again, I'm not a classroom teacher, but I'm hearing from a lot, and I see a lot of classroom teachers who are chomping at the bit, waiting to be able to figure out how to do the remote learning situation well, and they're figuring things out. I just picture that if we have kids that are coming to school, why are we not able to, each classroom, and again, this is more elementary, sorry, middle, but like each classroom teacher is instructing their kids remotely, and they have their classroom, and then they are able to then pivot and go home if need be, you know, if we shut down or we have to quarantine. And then it's just the one consistent teacher. You know, if the kids at home aren't going to be missing, in my mind, they're not missing a whole lot being at home if the classroom teacher is standing behind a plexiglass, you know, barrier and isn't walking around and isn't, you might as well be Zooming with kids at home and including kids that are sitting in your classroom as well. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to think of how do we do this that is the most consistent, back and forth, you know, one consistent teacher.
So
does that make sense?
Are you talking about the idea we had about streaming from the classroom?
Kind of. I mean, if you're clicking to let people into a Zoom, you know, if this is our classroom and I'm in front of my classroom and I've let you all into my classroom and there's maybe some kids sitting in front of me too, and and we're all, you know, they might be sitting there, but they're also able to join. Does it really make a difference if they're home and there's 10 kids sitting in front of you? I don't know. I'm just asking. I know that that's a concern for a lot of people. Again, like I said, we've said from the beginning, we want consistency. We don't want it to be confusing. We want it to be an easy flow. And I just want to make sure that we are true to that as well. And maybe it's a discussion that more elementary needs to have, you know, within itself, and middle has to have with the teachers because they're the ones that are going to be doing it. I don't know.
Go ahead, Heather.
Just one thing maybe to help for Michelle with this, it came up in some conversations that if you're running a lesson, say from a empty classroom, you know, like, or an empty office space, and you're streaming that Zoom lesson, One of the big things about that that's different is you don't wear a mask while you're doing it. If there are kids in the room, the mask is on. If you're alone in the room, the door is closed, now you get this. You get that engagement, you get a face, and that might end up being more useful to kids in their learning, to have that human contact rather than, you know, this. So it is one of the-
But the kids at school will be having that anyway, right? If they're in the classroom with a teacher, facilitator, whoever, those kids are getting it with a mask anyway.
Yeah,
Right? Not everybody is going to be.
I think the technical aspects of that with sound and audio were also tripping us up too, because the mask also prevents some of the sound from coming through, and, you know, finding the technology that could follow just the teacher, pick up just that sound and not any ambient sound in the room. We don't, you know, not that kids aren't quiet all the time. But I think there might be issues with the sound. And I think because it's harder already for kids over Zoom to be distant, trying to, again, make it equitable. But it is a point that we talked about. Some of the logistics are hard, but to Heather's point, some of those other things are hard too. Yeah. Plus, I think we also ran into the issue of, I don't know, you know, I used to teach with an FM unit for a student, and you know, there's times when you forget to turn it off. Like, you know, there's issues like that too. Teachers are going to have a lot on their minds, in terms, especially if you have kids in front of you, because the thing that I'm also picturing is the logistics of watching. I know we're all going to be hypersensitive to symptoms, or, you know, and things like that, and whether or not kids are keeping their masks on, whether or not they're touching each other, whether or not they're sharing resources, whether or not they're, you know, and I just want to free teachers up as much as possible when they're in person to be watching for those health and safety issues. That is not something we normally have to watch for. You know, we don't have to normally care if a kid hands another kid a pencil. They shouldn't be doing that now. You know, so there's other things that we're going to have to worry about in person that I want to, like, free up people's brains for, if I can. Kate?
I'm just curious with the whole team approach. I understand that, but like with pre-K, we're a team of 2 who are both supposed to be in with that class. So can you comment on how that might look for us?
I will comment that we need to talk as a team about pre-K and EC. Tracy and I were just talking about it this morning. Still working on that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Early childhood is tough. And we know that the little ones, you know, if anyone benefits from the in-person instruction, it's the little ones. So we've got to figure out a way to support those little guys. Yeah. That's not the right answer, I know, but we'll work together on it. That's the answer. Is that, who's raising their hand?
Anne.
Anne, your name says Brian today.
I know, I couldn't find the link, so he just forwarded me his.
I was like, wait a minute, that's not Brian.
I probably shouldn't have said that on the public viewing, but oh well.
Okay. It's okay.
Sorry about that. Have you, this is, some questions came up, and you might not have the answer to this just yet, but I know for the people on my team, physical education, you know, music, drama, things like that, and class discussions, how would that work if we're holding those activities remote, but students are at school in the safe space with a monitor? Like, how would they participate in those class discussions, whether it's a book club discussion or, you know, singing or dribbling a basketball, you know, I don't know.
Right. So the class discussions will probably have to we could handle a couple different ways. I mean, it depends on the size of the group, but I could see us using some kind of chat technology or Google Doc to have like a written discussion maybe. Or we've talked a lot about outdoor spaces. So Jay has been looking into tents and things for outdoor spaces to have, you know, nice spaces to kind of shield kids. But when there is music, instrument time, times where kids need to be out, you know, even potentially for a discussion, if you wanted those masks off, you know, and to kind of separate the kids out so that they could really zoom in, that would be an opportunity.
The only thing I would add to that is that there may be opportunities as you plan and deploy the not asynchronous instruction. I mean, obviously it may not be a dialogue because it's occurring individually, but when the kids are not in the building and at home doing asynchronous work, they could be recording with a mask off and submitting videos and that sort of thing. I know it's not exactly the answer to Anne's question, but just a reminder that asynchronous instruction has some advantages perhaps that the synchronous instruction doesn't, depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
Sure. And the thing we need to remember too, as a community, is that even though these are new words, synchronous and asynchronous, that's what we do. You know, like, anyway, when kids are with us, we're doing synchronous instruction. When they're at home doing homework, they're doing asynchronous. If we're doing a flipped classroom, that's asynchronous and synchronous learning. We were doing that for a long time before we ran into this situation. So we're using new words, but really it's what the kids are doing with us and what they're doing on their own, you know, and there's always been a place for that in education. So I think we have to remember that too. Andy?
Yeah, and I'm going a bit of a different direction, sorry, but I want to get this out there. So something I've heard on this conversation today and in previous ones a lot about concerns about relationships with teachers, right? And I will say that one reason we are so glad we live in Lake Bluff and one reason we're so glad our kids are at the elementary school is because we've had phenomenal teachers and even phenomenal relationships with teachers that my kids have never even had. And I think that there's this sense of loss, you know, that we're all dealing with right now for a variety of things. And I want to, you know, and there's a sense of loss with, I think this past week with parents thinking, well, now maybe my kid won't be going to school. And there's a number of different losses that's associated with that. And I just want to challenge us all if we can find a way to minimize those losses. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's that, if there's a way to put students with teachers they already have a relationship with. I don't know if that means some teachers loop up. I don't know if that means that maybe kids can be placed with teachers their families have had before, be it remote or in person. I think that's going to help parents feel more strongly about their decision, whatever way they go, because that is such a strong pull and such a sense of loss. I just think there's have to be some, and if we can bring out the next couple of weeks some of those creative things that maybe, you know, I know have already been in discussion, it might help parents to feel like there may not be as much loss as they're currently thinking there is, if that makes sense.
No, I've also heard the same suggestion, and I'm looking at my list of FAQs that I have for the last couple of weeks. Looping was a suggestion for sure. And that's something that we'll have to talk about again as we get our numbers in. And I do want to, you know, I want to emphasize, teachers, when we get our numbers in and the surveys are in, it's on us together to collaboratively figure this out once we know who's doing what. And it's, you know, on the one hand, it's hard as an administrator to think about that in the summer. We are not used to doing that. We aren't used to bothering you in the summer. I hate to say it, but you know, this is the time for us to do our planning and us to do the work so that we can be ready for when you come back. So we're trying to limit the amount of time that you guys are spending planning with us and trying to take some of that heavy lifting. But at the same time, we don't want it to seem like we're not collaborating. We just want to get you involved when it's time to really move and figure this out. And I do believe that once we get to that point, we will feel a sense of relief together collectively as a staff, because we'll be able to have the details to start moving with these plans. And right now we're just in limbo. And I apologize for that, because we needed some time to figure out how we wanted to structure this. But the structure's out there, we'll get our data back, and then we'll be able to move and do some planning. And the goal was to have us focused, so that we can be thinking about instruction and curriculum and not thinking about logistics. You guys, logistics has taken over the brains of many administrators for the last 6 months. And you can get swallowed in it, because the guidance is deep and changing and contradictory, and everyone's sending you a new article of a new study that came out on the virus and what we should and shouldn't be doing. And again, we're trying to take as much of that away so that you guys can focus on what you do best, which is instructing and caring for our kids. And when we get those numbers in and you sit with your teams and your administrator and me and whoever it is, your building level administrator, and we start to work out the details, we're going to make plans that work for each group of kids. And I say that now because I mean it. It might not look the same by grade because of enrollment. So parents need to understand the consistency will be throughout the grade, but it will not necessarily be between grades, because again, those numbers are going to be really different. So a family could have a couple of different situations in their family in terms of how they're connecting with a teacher or how that's structured. And that I'm putting out there. I mean, we're going to try to maintain consistency through the grade and that guaranteed viable curriculum and that experience as consistent as possible, but we can't guarantee that between grades. We'll do the best we can, but at teams, we're going to have to figure out what works best for your kids in that grade and what you need to do in your curriculum. So I just want to assure you that that is part of our thinking as we move forward. Amanda?
This might be in the weeds a little, but I was just thinking, like, once we do come up with a plan and we know potentially like, okay, I'll be facilitating these, I'm making up numbers, 10 kids or something. Just having an opportunity to do some sort of meet and greet before, whether it is like on Zoom. I know that that is a small detail, but I know for kids that meet the teacher day is like I've had kids tell me, I remember what lipstick you were wearing. And so like, it's just like their best. They just really love that first moment. It's like the first impression. And I feel like taking that away would be so much harder to just like jump in without really having some time to meet and learn about what they like and things. So no matter if you have a class or a facilitated group or a remote group, whatever it may be, I think just getting to know them before we jump in is really important.
I think that's great. And thank you for asking that, because it just shows how great our teachers are. I know others are thinking of that too. And I think we could still do that for kids who enroll remotely. We could bring them in one day, 10 kids, let's meet, let's talk, let me hear what you're about and tell me about your family. Like we could do that outside, and keep everybody safe. And then you've at least had that contact. The other thing we've talked about, if we don't loop, I remember you guys saying this in the spring when I got to meet with your teams, that could there be an opportunity for closure too, if we don't loop, to just reach back to those families and kiddos from last year and say, oh my gosh, you grew and I'm not seeing you over a computer, all those things. So both are in our minds, and they're actually not small details. Those are really big and important pieces for kids. So thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, Erin, do you want to talk? Erin?
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback off of what Amanda kind of said. Our kindergarten team has been talking a lot about that, and especially ours that aren't coming from our own pre-K building, to get in and actually know the building and things like that, so that they can feel part of our school and our community and things like that, has been something that we have been really thinking about, and how it's going to look for those kids.
I love that you're thinking about that. I do. Thank you.
I might just jump in and say that is important as well, sort of from my perspective, and thinking about like our kindergarten start date and what that might look like. I'm not saying we have extreme flexibility there, but I do think just sort of putting it out there for parents, announce August 25th is our start day. It will likely look different for kindergarten, and hopefully with the value add of the relationship building and supporting the comfort of our 3 to 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds as they are joining our community.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of concern from parents coming in who are like worried about their kids separating and things too. So just being mindful of like those kids, and of course who are coming to us, and us having to keep distance and creating a safer space for those kids, because a lot of them have been home and not out much, and making sure that school is going to look different in general. So making sure that it just feels like a safe, comfortable place, and making a space for them to get comfortable. But I know parents are also very like anxious sending their kids, and what's going to happen when they go to separate from them for the first time after being at home. So
That's great. Thank you, Erin. Vanessa, did you have another thing?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quick, what Andy was saying, like in regards to the loss, was really like hit me, like as that gave words to kind of like what I'm feeling and what I think a lot of our kids are feeling. And so I was just trying to come up with ways to minimize that. And one thing that I will say is like specials teachers, being one myself, like the beauty of our job is we do get to follow kids for a longer period of time. So technically we are familiarity to them. So I think we can really use that to help like make them more comfortable, you know? So like what Amanda was saying in terms of meet and greet, like maybe, you know, we pop on to specials team and we, you know, it's a familiar face to most kids. I think there is that gap between K1 and 2 and then 3, 4, and 5 where we have a different specials teacher. So I think we also need to keep in mind that those kids going from 2nd to 3rd will also have all new specials teachers. So just something to keep in mind.
My kids love you, by the way, Vanessa.
No. That's awesome. Christy?
I think Vanessa and I think a lot alike, maybe because of the fact that we both teach Spanish across grade levels. I was thinking of that sense of loss, and I was wondering if we could reframe it as gaining for teachers. If you're looking at grade levels, really working with all the teachers, as maybe we're not losing how could we build that deep connection with 4 different teachers instead of just 1? So kids are really gaining more teachers and more sets of eyes and support than that one that we, you know, had before. So there may be a way to look at this from a different lens, that we're really gaining something very different than we're used to looking at it, but maybe that's another lens or an opportunity.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's a benefit to co-teaching models that we've seen before. You know, like you can think of this in terms of providing special education, right? A co-teaching model is a great model. You have two adults in the room addressing the needs of the students. That's exactly what we're talking about. And it might look like the whole team, might look like pairs, it might look like 2 and 3. It depends on the team. But to Vanessa's point, it will also include social worker, you know, related arts, special services, administrator. Like there are some common threads here that we can build upon to make sure that people and families and kids feel comfortable with what we're doing. It's awesome that you're thinking through these things. Yeah. Nate, did you?
I was only going to echo. I appreciate, we call it here at the middle school reframe. We find ourselves reframing a lot. And I think that's what we're going to have to continue to do in order to find success going forward, is looking at things in a different way. So thank you for doing that, Christy. Appreciate it.
Heather?
And I appreciate what Christy had to say, because it actually dovetails nicely with what happens at the middle school. We don't just have one group of kids. We tend to take them all under our wing. So even if I don't have them in math class, I might see them at lunch. And our science and social studies teachers have every kid in the grade, and they form those connections. And it really is pretty neat for the kids, because they do get that different adults that they can interact with, and it makes us like a family instead of just a group.
Well, you guys are awesome, and I appreciate you coming today. I know it's been a crazy week and the announcement was tough. I'm sure it's been hard listening to questions and fielding feedback. You know, I know that our parents sometimes are probably reaching out to you to find out what to do or what you think. And, you know, in that situation, I would encourage them that no matter what they choose, they're not making a bad decision. And that the goal here is for us to keep everyone safe. And we do that when there's less kids in the building. I mean, that's basically what I presented on Tuesday. That is the goal. And I'll be honest, as a school administrator, if I can't keep kids safe, nothing else matters. So that's first and foremost. And the same goes for you guys. Without a safe staff, we don't have a school. So if parents are reaching out, that's our goal. We want it to be amazing for everyone. We want it to be consistent, guaranteed, and viable for everyone. And we want to encourage them to make a decision without fear of being left behind or being unsafe. We're trying to minimize that choice between one or the other, and that's the goal. And, you know, if from everything that I've seen in my 21 days, or however you want to call it, however many days I met you before I started, I have no doubt that we will reach that goal together. It will be a wonderful year for our students. So I thank you for coming today very much. Encourage folks to come on the 27th to the Q&A. If they have questions, encourage them to reach out to me, the administrative team, anybody that they feel comfortable with to share their concerns or questions. We want to work this out right, and we want to do it together. So thanks, guys, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.